think about joining me on a little journey. We reached out to a mosque near where I live and reached out to the imam named Tariq and said, hey, I'm a Christian apologist. Can I come get a tour of your mosque and then just ask you some questions about your faith? They were totally open to this. In fact, invited my son and I, who's 11, who you'll see going with me on this journey, to a meal ahead of time, which I think promises to be really good. The goal is to build some relationships and learn along the way. Let's go. So that is your title, Imam.
Yeah,
Okay.
or religious director.
Okay.
So I direct all things religious.
So this is beef with the meat bone right there, these two. Okay. That looks like chicken, I'm guessing.
Boneless chicken.
All right, score.
And here's some
I'm gonna fall asleep if I eat this.
Here's some fish.
Comfort food. Holy cow. Amazing meal. We are heading out now to get a chance to watch them for their afternoon prayers.
Allahu Akbar. So we have a set amount of positions, and we have set times where we pray, and it's 5 times a day. And each position of prayer, you do specific actions, and all of them are symbolizing an aspect of our relationship with God. So when we stand, we are reciting verses from the Quran. It's all in Arabic.
My son found that prayer time so fascinating for a range of reasons. Now we're headed to get a little tour of the mosque.
So this is the main prayer hall.
Okay.
Over there, that's the pulpit. So that's where I give the Friday sermon. Like Christians, they have Sunday for Mass. We have Friday. So this is the Quran, all in Arabic. This is the compilation of statements and practices of the Prophet. So you have the Arabic and the English translation here. A lot of the English translations are really bad.
Really?
So if you come across something very strange, it's because the one translating didn't do the the most thorough job. We'll go to the multi-purpose room. Right now it's set up for Friday prayer. Friday prayer, we get around 1,000 people between the 2 services.
1,000 people, that's a good amount.
All right, this is our newest addition. This is the lounge.
Wow, this is like a coffee shop for hanging out.
Yep.
Some rooms you might expect in a mosque, but what fascinated me is they're building a coffee shop, which is very similar to what many churches do to get people to just hang out and spend time there.
Yeah, you're gonna like this. Let me show you this. This right here was purchased for a few $1,000s. Based on the colors, what comes to mind?
Oh gosh, first off, I'm colorblind.
I think it's the Lakers.
It's exactly the Lakers.
Oh, Shaners!
And written in Arabic is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Are you serious?
Yep.
That's what
it is.
Oh my goodness. Tour is almost done. We got one more room to check out.
So this is the overflow prayer hall. This is where our sisters, our ladies will pray on Fridays.
That is huge. Which mosque?
Yeah, this is the
that?
mosque in Medina. This is the Prophet's mosque, as they call it. It can house easily 1 million people.
Inside that?
Not inside, so also the court area.
Oh, the court area, okay.
Courtyard area.
That is incredible, and it's beautiful too.
Personally, it's the most peaceful place I've ever been.
You know what was surprising is that I bring people of other faiths also here, and I've heard comments from them that this is the most peaceful place I've ever been. And I don't see it that way, because to me it's like I come 5 times a day or 3 times a day, whatever, once a day, or don't come. But when I bring them, generally we bring them on Fridays.
So what time is the Friday message?
1:15 begins.
1:15.
Yes.
Why 1:15?
Convenient for people, so we try and make it earlier in the hour so that people, because a lot of people come during their lunch break. Quick message,
Done.
prayer,
And
on your way.
out.
We invite you and your family to come here one Friday
I really appreciate that.
and bring up your children, your wife, friends, neighbors, and say we're going to go and observe today.
Well, thank you for that invitation.
Sure.
Now I get a chance to sit down with Tariq and just ask him some questions about his faith, about being a Muslim in America, how he parents if he's experienced doubt, and some other interesting questions. Appreciate you guys being great hosts and allowing me, as an apologist, I'm sure in the back of your mind are like, who is this guy? What's his angle? You guys have been incredible, and thanks for letting me just ask you some questions.
Well, thanks for coming. We're very glad that you came to our institution to see who we are and what we do. And we're all about the dialogue, and I think there's a lot for us to learn from each other and for each other, especially in these times where people are trying to figure a lot of things out.
Tell me your story about becoming a Muslim. Is this part of your family? Did you convert to it?
I'm the son of immigrants from Palestine,
Okay.
and I was born and raised in the middle-class southwest suburbs of Chicago. I grew up like any other American, trying to figure out who I am what I'm doing here. Did all the things that any other teenager would do. Really
Yeah.
a heavy gamer, especially PC games. My favorite was Counter-Strike. Played
Okay.
that at a semi-professional level, actually.
Wow.
My family was actually a little bit more conservative, so
Okay.
what the religion was, its importance was, transmitted to us by my parents. But as a teenager, you trying to, should I do this? It's very hard to do it, and why should I do it? I'll be unpopular at school. Until one day, me and some of my Muslim friends were having conversations with some of our Christian friends, actually, very, very wonderful individuals from Kentucky who we used to game with.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we actually visited them. Very gracious hosts. His parents were wonderful people, so I'm always grateful for that friendship. And every now and then we would have these friendly debates about Islam and
How old are
and
you at
Christian.
this
I was
time?
probably 16 years old at this
Okay.
time.
All right.
Yeah, and so of course, each one passionately debates their convictions, which
Sure.
is normal, right? But what was great is that the relationship was so positive that we can tease each other, we can push back against each other, and within 30 minutes, we're all right. We're on the same team, and we have to be, we have to play the opponents.
Fair enough.
So that is a moment in my life that I think is very cherished by me, and it was in these debates that I became more curious about the religion because they would ask us questions. What about this? What about that?
Of course.
I need to answer,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And fortunately, YouTube was new on the scene, so you just go to YouTube and you type it, and I was introduced to Islamic scholarship,
Okay.
right? My dad used to take me to the mosque, and it was primarily it was still immigrants, so they would speak Arabic, not English. They were concerned about their issues, not what we were growing up dealing with. So when I actually was introduced to scholarship, for the first time, the religion felt more relevant to my daily life than simply rituals that you must do before you meet God. I never had this crisis of faith where is this, truth or not. I was pretty comfortable with the faith, but the seriousness came in about my later teens, late teens, and it's due to the scholarship.
You felt like it was yours. You owned it at that point.
I felt empowered by it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's the knowledge
Okay.
element that really empowered me. Since then, I just kept growing in my journey and this faith.
So you didn't have a crisis of faith.
No.
Do you ever have doubts since that point? Like, how confident are you in your mind? Is it like 100%, 95%? How often do you have doubts, and if so, what kind are they?
I know this sounds overconfident or maybe even a little bit arrogant, but I have never truly doubted any reasonable amount of doubt the faith. I'm very comfortable with it, and I truly believe that this is the truth. This is what pleases God, the Creator. Why that is, I don't know. Probably has to do a lot with the fact that I come from a stable background. What I mean by that is when Muslims do research about why Muslims who are born in Muslim families no longer identify as Muslims, we thought, or the researchers thought, that it's going to be an issue of atheism, ideology. But they found that the number one reason, the predominant reason, is the behaviors of other Muslims. As a person coming from an environment, a social environment where fortunately we never had these very bizarre outliers who did crazy things within the family, I think that might have a lot to do with it. And I think the simplicity of the faith as well, this idea that there's God, He created you for a reason, that is to have a relationship with you, has always resonated with me.
So no doubts, no questions has always made sense to you.
I'm always learning.
Of
I still
course,
see
of
myself as
course.
very ignorant to a lot of the important realities, and you grow in your journey. But in terms of, is this what God wants from me, I've always been comfortable with it.
The largest studies on faith transmission of any kind do show that a stable family background is just huge. And that was true for me too. I had a stable family background. Now you described some people leaving the Islamic faith.
Yeah.
How much is that happening today? Because we hear about crises in like the Mormon church, you hear about it in the Christian faith, you hear about in other faiths. How common do you see that? How much does that concern you as an imam over a mosque when you look at the next generation?
One of the greatest challenges about being imam of a mosque, or I think any religious leader has this challenge, is that people who come to the religious institution come for certain convictions. And that's only representing a subsection of the broader community, right? People who aren't very convinced aren't going to come. That's always a challenge that the religious leader needs to be aware of and find ways of truly grounding themselves with reality.
And so personally, I always try and find people who are out there in the business world, people who are less regulars at the mosque, and ask them the question, what's going on in the world? I want to know how people see the religion from the world you come from, not from the mosque where we all kind of share the same vision. That's why we're here. But in terms of statistics, I believe it's Pew Research found that about 23% of those born in a Muslim family no longer identify as Muslim. But the question is why?
Yeah.
What you find is that those families are very not practicing. So these aren't people coming from practicing families or families that have a relationship with their local mosque or the religion. These are people who, their parents were Muslim just by name. That's it. They never practiced anything about the faith.
So it's more cultural than it is.
It's like, yeah, you know, my
else.
parents said they're Muslim, so I'm just kind of doing whatever is left of that. And then by the time their children come about in America, it's okay, why is this relevant to me? The greatest challenge of religion in our times is how is it relevant? It's not an issue of does this ideology make sense? It's an issue of, okay, I get it, but what's the point? And if it's what's the point, then as an American, holding the name Muslim, that's a huge disadvantage in the public world. So might as well shed it.
What would be the point in doing so?
Yeah.
I'm curious how you think about passing on your faith. You shared that you have a son who's 6 and a daughter who's 2 months, right?
Yes.
So I have 3 kids, a decent amount older than that, and I think a lot about passing on my faith to my kids. I've written a book on it. What does that look like for you? How do you think about passing on your faith to your son and your daughter, especially in a culture that's not primarily Muslim? What intentional steps do you take or plan on taking to pass on your faith to your kids?
If I want my child to value this religion, then he needs to see that I value it. If I want my child to take it really seriously, I need to take it seriously. If I want my child to truly absorb what the religion really means, the beauty of the religion, the holistic nature of the religion, the moderation of the religion, then I need to do that. So number one, I have to improve myself because it's not fair for a parent to expect from their child better than what they are.
I agree with that.
I think that's very unfair. We hope they're better, right?
Of course.
But in
Of course.
terms of us holding them accountable for being better than us, that's very unfair. Number two, how do I build a relationship between him and God, right? I don't want my child to view religion as connected to the parent because my place in my son's life is limited. Sooner or later, I mean, it's just life, the circle of life, as they say.
Of course.
Sooner or later, that child needs to be independent. And so if my child's relationship to the religion, to God, is conditional to my presence, then what's going to happen when I'm no longer present? Right? So I want him to have a direct relationship with God. How do I do it? Well, in Islam, we have this concept of the names of God. Now, in Christianity, I know that God has certain characteristics, right?
Sure.
So what do I need to do in order to build that relationship? I need to take the names of God and teach my son how to see his names in the world around him, to where when he looks at a tree, he appreciates the science. He doesn't negate it. He appreciates it. But at the same time, that tree has a message from God, and that creator is beautiful. And because of his beauty, he made the tree beautiful. And he made the tree beautiful to send you a message that he actually cares about you. That's the second thing. The third is role models. Obviously, a child's number one role model is one of their parents, or both. Right?
Of course.
But beyond that, we try and make the role models that are most present and central in the mind of our children the prophets. Right? God sent the prophets for a reason. Number one, to convey the message. But number two, to be role models for the people who follow them.
That's a very thoughtful response. So model for your kids, really teach them what you would consider an Islamic worldview through the world itself, not just science, but a faith perspective, and then role models. Partly what surprised me is you said Friday prayers at different times, 1,000 people will come to this mosque. Of the people that come and practice here that are Muslims, were most raised that way? Did some convert to the faith? If I went and I did a survey of the different people, kind of where their faith journey, what would you discover amongst most of them here?
Yeah, so the majority are going to come from Muslim majority countries, ethnically speaking. In terms of the demographic breakdown between immigrant versus American born, at a national level, meaning throughout America, it's about, I think it's somewhere like 60% immigrant born, 40% American born. Of course, over the course of the next decade, the American born Muslims will exceed the immigrant born Muslims. In terms of reverts to the faith, we call them reverts.
Yeah, that makes
That's what they
sense.
like to call themselves,
Yeah.
right? So you'll find a few in this area who attend regularly the mosque, but the majority are going to be born to Muslim families. Some will be ethnically from Muslim majorities, but they left the faith and then they came back, or they weren't really practicing, so
Sure.
they say, yeah, I wasn't practicing, so I consider myself kind of like a revert or something like
Okay.
that. But yeah, people have different experiences.
Like if you go to a Christian church, not for all of them, but probably most people there grew up as Christians,
Yeah.
and those who convert is probably a smaller percentage.
Yeah.
Would that be true
Yes.
here? Same kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay, interesting, interesting. How many Christians reach out to you? Let's go to a meal. I want to visit the mosque. Want to get to know you.
Yeah.
How common is that, whether they're in some kind of formal ministry like a pastor, a professor like myself, or is this kind of an exception for a Christian to reach out in this way?
No, we've been working on our interfaith relationships for the past 2 decades. And we built some long-lasting relationships with pastors and with rabbis as well. And we're very proud of those relationships. We've done simple, but I think important work with each other. So one thing that we've done with the Interfaith Council here is an annual bully forum, where we raise awareness about bullying, and we gather these teenagers, and we really inform them, like, there are some people getting bullied, and what that does to them, and how very often you'll find yourself as a bystander, and that we want to show you, no, you shouldn't be a bystander. What can you do to resolve or diffuse that situation? How can you help somebody who's being
great.
bullied? We have an annual interfaith Thanksgiving food drive.
Oh, nice.
This mosque, a church, and a synagogue gather together, and we just work together to prepare
great.
meals for the less fortunate people for Thanksgiving, to make sure that we can minimize how many people are hungry on that day. Another thing we do together is at the end of the year, we commemorate homeless people who died in the year. So we just read out their names. So the various faith traditions come together, and
Interesting.
we do it on the longest night of the year. This
I've never heard of that.
We've been humbled by the kindness that we've seen from some churches and synagogues supporting us when Muslims were portrayed in the media as these foreign aliens who are a threat to the nation. So we're very fortunate to have this livelihood between the faiths, and we acknowledge our differences.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
We've developed this comfort that I have my way, you have your way, but that doesn't mean we can't work it with each other in different ways.
What do you think are some of the core areas that Christians and Muslims agree, and where do they disagree? And by the way, before you answer that, one of the things I really try to do on my channel is just clarity.
Yeah.
Like, I'm fine with disagreement. That's great. That actually helps us better be in relationship when we understand differences.
Sure.
So what do you think are some of the key things you have in common? What do you say these are big differences between us?
The commonalities is that we believe there's God, right? And that God is the central aspect of our lives, although we may differ in terms of certain specificities of God and the nature of God. We all believe in the afterlife. The emphasis that each religion gives to the afterlife does vary quite drastically, actually. So in Islam, the afterlife is huge, right? That we have thousands of verses and statements from the Prophet that discuss the afterlife. In fact, we have so much detail about the afterlife that we know in detail what happens from the moment you breathe your last breath to when the gates of paradise are closed and the gates of hellfire are closed, and what goes on in each of them. We all believe in the prophets. A lot of the prophets you find in the Quran are also mentioned in the Bible, the Old and New Testaments. But where I feel there might be a little bit different, and again, this, my limitations, my ignorance of the other faiths, because my specialty is not comparative religion, but this is just observing my conversations with others. I think the prophets are more central to how we do things as Muslims than what I've seen. So very commonly, Muslims will be at each other's throats saying, the Prophet didn't do that, the Prophet didn't do that. And you so arguing over what the Prophet actually did or what other prophets actually did. Going back to God, we don't believe that God manifests himself in any physical form. We love Jesus, we revere him, he is a prophet of ours that we are commanded to love and to take as a role model. You cannot be a Muslim without loving Jesus. But Jesus to us is a human being and a messenger of God. He is not beyond that.
You said Jesus was not a criminal, not God in human flesh, also would not believe, like my understanding is Surah 4, that Jesus died on the cross.
Yeah, we don't believe that Jesus died on the cross. Rather, God elevated him, lifted him to the heavens, before the Romans captured, right? Somebody was
Okay.
crucified. It just wasn't.
Got it.
It wasn't Jesus.
How open are Muslims to having spiritual conversations with Christians? Are they seeking it out? If a Christian comes, is there a little bit of a hesitancy? You've got an angle. How would you assess the openness and willingness and eagerness of the average, if there is such a thing, as a person who comes and worships here that's a part of the mosque?
If you're a person who's truly convinced with your faith, there's no need to go beyond it. It's like, okay, why do I need to have a conversation with a Christian when I have the truth? Or a Christian might say the same thing. Okay, why do I need to have a conversation with a Muslim if I have the truth? I don't expect people who are convinced with their faith to go out of their way to have a conversation with somebody outside of the faith. Unless, that is, you create a culture around it. You create a culture where you inform your congregants about the value of having conversations with different people. I'm sure you're not coming here for me to convince you about Islam. I'm not having this conversation with you for you to convince me that Christianity is the truth. We could have that conversation elsewhere.
I'd love it,
right?
yeah.
But there's more value in having conversations than apostolization. Proselytization, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no.
I
That's a
mix
very
apostasy.
different- Fair enough.
Proselytization, right?
I got you. So if you were going to look at the focus of your mosque, being inward like parenting classes, outward evangelism, what percentage, if you had to break it down? Because it sounds like much more the energy is building up, caring for those who are Muslims than trying to evangelize. Like there's some big churches very close to here that are evangelistic churches, right? So this is not a judgment whether you should do one or the other. I'm really curious where your focus, this mosque is. If you had to say it's 50-50, 80-20, what's more important in terms of the time and resources spent for you? What would you say if you had to guess?
We don't put any resources in evangelism.
Oh, you don't?
As a mosque, right?
Okay.
Not because we don't believe in it, but as a mosque and as an institution, our primary focus has been helping our members develop the skills and the characteristics to be able to deal with life and to be able to transmit successfully the faith to the next generation. We do things like networking events where we bring people, hey, you know, here are fellow professionals network. We do a lot of charity stuff. We have plans of finding ways to work with the local cities to do projects just to
Improve the city.
Improve whatever. We live in probably the most beautiful part of the world, right?
It's
But
very beautiful.
I'm sure there's a playground somewhere in this area that could use a little bit of a touch-up. Our approach has been, we need to prepare our community to be able to deal with life for what it is. And that means learning how to live side by side with somebody who doesn't have the same beliefs as you, and learn to be able to have a conversation with that individual, and learn that I still have a responsibility and a duty towards their well-being, because that's what our religion teaches us. So kind of breaking that isolation mentality that a lot of, you know, maybe people who come from minorities might feel, like, I just want to do my own thing because I'm not to break that, to realize that, no, there are people who could use your help.
Fair enough. So I sent you these questions ahead of time, but you said I could throw some at you.
Sure,
so role play with me, all right?
Yeah.
Your son's 6. I'm your son, and I'm 18 years old.
Yeah.
I say, Dad, I don't believe this anymore. I'm an atheist. Or I'm a Christian. I'm not a Muslim anymore. Respond.
Okay, well, why?
I just don't think it's true anymore. I think something else is true.
So, my son, I didn't raise you to follow me. I raised you and tried to give you the skills to be able to make the right decisions. Now, I'm going to say you're making a wrong decision, but I'll have a conversation with you. My strategy would be to realize that this is an adult, an independent person, and that he has his own distinct personality. What will convince him might not be the same thing that convinced me. And if somehow he got to that point, I'm the first person to blame. That's the way I would take it.
So you would take it personally no matter
I would take it
what.
personally, but not in a way where I'm going to now extract revenge. Like, how dare you disobey me? It's okay, where did I go wrong? What did I do to get him to that point? Now, it's not always a parent's fault. Let's just be clear here, right?
Of course.
This is just me personally.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so I would continue to engage him. I would not disengage. I would continue to entertain his thoughts. Why? So that if I can't win him back, it doesn't change the fact that he's my son. Right? I always teach my students that the religion never promotes the complete severing of ties between two individuals. You can distance yourself. You can
And
create a big
sometimes you
distance.
should, yeah.
Right? Which sometimes you need
Yeah.
to. But the complete severing of ties between two fellow human beings is not a practice of the faith. No matter for what reason. Some parents actually go through that. It's very difficult. And what I've learned in terms of, now I have to play a role as a parent. I had to take the kind of the hurt away and understand that religion is not something that you can enforce, nor is it meant to be enforced. God wants a relationship with an individual who willingly submits, who out of love of God submits to him.
Sure.
That's the relationship, not do it because you have to. So I hope that never happens. Where I'm at now, that's probably how I would approach it.
That's how you would.
I wouldn't kick him out of my home. I wouldn't treat him as any less of a son, right? Because my responsibility as a father is irrespective of
Whether
his
he believes
religion.
or not.
Of course, I would be
Fair
hurt,
enough.
very hurt, but I do my best to try and maintain that relationship through conversation.
Last one, you started to hint at this before, a little common ground we have. I told you 2 loves that I have are basketball and Marvel. You started telling me that you love analyzing Marvel films. In fact, on this, I think you noticed both my phone and Iron Man and Spider-Man. I do like superhero stories. Tell me about your love for analyzing films. I'm curious.
So what's great about the Marvel films, the way Marvel characters are presented, you can very quickly resonate with them. It's like this is just a regular person living their life, and on the side they do their superhero stuff. They go through their own struggles. They have their own problems and trauma that they have to deal with. Have you watched the Loki series?
Yep, with my son.
Do you know what story they were talking about in terms of historically?
Tell me what you mean.
So what is the tension in the Loki, the first season? What's the philosophical tension? It is, do we have free will? Determinism?
Agreed.
Or voluntarism?
Yep.
And you have this clash. And they do it very brilliantly to where it's like they're not alluding to which one is correct. You see how each one views it, and like, yeah, I get their point, I get their point. This is actually reflecting a moment in human history. The religious wars of Europe, the Reformation and the clash between determinism and voluntarism.
Okay.
And what that did, the way they depict time helped answer a lot of philosophical questions that were very difficult in terms of the religious discussions. At least in the Islamic tradition, there is a narration from the Prophet that says in the last third of the night, of every night, God descends to the lower heavens. And he calls out and says, is there anybody who wants forgiveness? So I forgive them. Does anybody need anything so that I help them? And our scholars were throat at throat, saying, like, how can we take this literally when there's some point on the earth where it's the last third of the night? I mean, God is constantly in the first heaven and over the throne. They just couldn't fathom the notion of being outside of time and how irrelevant time is if you're outside of it. So I'm sitting there, I'm seeing a visualization of life or existence outside of time and how I'm able to make sense of religious ideas through that. It's like this notion of God guiding you. What's it? He who remains. He says, I paved the road. I did all of this. And he did it so easily. Why? Because, well, time's in front. Now, God is perfection. He's way beyond any physical manifestation. I just want to be clear here. But it helps make these ideas a lot more tangible. And it can improve your relationship with God through that. You know, I don't think they were intentionally doing this, right? But it's very interesting. So Marvel, it's gotten bad now, right?
Oh, you don't have to convince me.
The first few, what do they call it? The phases.
Yeah.
They did a wonderful job, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of smaller details that reflect or suggest certain things.
I'm only smirking because my audience is like, they're like, Sean, this is in your lane. I love these conversations. We could literally talk about this for hours. That's fascinating. You have that in common. Thanks for the time. Really appreciate your thoughtfulness and willingness to host us.
Thank you for coming.
That was
Thank you
great.
for accepting our invitation.
A couple quick takeaways from this experience. Number one, our hosts, Mahbub and Tariq, were incredibly gracious. They carved out a full afternoon to make sure we had our questions answered, to give us a tour, to be available for our questions in our project. Second, when we went to the food, which again was amazing at this restaurant, they accidentally ordered only enough for my son and I. So they ordered more, and it probably took 20 or 30 minutes. And then they offered us seconds before they were even going to eat firsts. So that was pretty awesome. At the end of this video, I want to give a big thank to my host for being super gracious. But second, we've also started conversations about maybe doing a follow-up video where we kind of compare and contrast Christianity and Islam and get into some of the differences on some of the big questions about life. So stay tuned.